Welcome back, DP Review TV viewers. It's Chris Nichols here. I've got my hands on a Ricoh GR IIIx. We're hitting the streets today. Now, it's been about 3 years since we played with the original Ricoh GR III with its 28mm equivalent lens. Now we've got the GR IIIx with its 40mm equivalent lens. Not much has changed in the body, and I do encourage you guys, check out the old video on the GR III. That'll cover a lot of the specs and a lot of the main features. Now, the handling of the GR IIIx is exactly the same as the GR III. It is made for one-handed shooting. Of course, I love the compact body design, but everything falls exactly where you want it to fall. The shutter button in particular, I actually really appreciate more now. It's a wide shutter button. Your finger can always find it, even on a small camera. Very easy to press when you want to get a quick shot. All the buttons, though, and dials are quite customizable. You can set them up for other features. I actually do like the front dial, although at first I felt it was too small. It actually works very well in practice. Now, I get that other than the lens, they want people to have a faithful experience, have exactly the same handling on both cameras, but at the same time, there's a lot of things on this camera that I wish were improved. Now, in the first video on the GR III, I complained that there was no manual focus ring on the camera. I still think that'd be a cool feature, but I'm actually gonna take that back. I think Ricoh totally gets a pass there because they're really focusing on their snap focus system, and it is a very smart idea. You can preset a distance in meters, basically in half-meter increments from close focusing to infinity, and it's got a really smart design because it actually shows you a depth of field indicator for your given aperture. So that's really nice. I can actually see when I'm getting hyperfocal distance focusing or what my actual range is. I will argue, though, that snap focus was a little bit easier to use on the GR III with its wider angle lens because you got more depth of field for a given aperture, and so you had more room to play with. On the 40mm, you definitely have to be more precise because your depth of field at the same given aperture is definitely more narrow. The only feature I'd like to see actually changed on the snap focus is maybe to give a snapature option as well. I'm going to coin that, so Ricoh has to pay me if they want to use it.
They don't have the money.
Oh, okay. Where, it doesn't just snap focus to a distance, but also goes to a predetermined aperture that I can set. That way I could be on the street just shooting like f2.8, thin depth of field shots, but then if I want to get that more hyperfocal kind of quick snap focus, it would also then default to a tighter aperture and give me that extra leeway. That could be nice. Now, as always with Ricoh cameras, we love the fact that the RAWs are in DNG format. Any software can open them up. So here's a process file for you. You get a process file, and you get a process file, and you get a process file too. Now, another thing that hasn't improved over the GR III, unfortunately, is we still don't have an EVF. And I get it. I know Ricoh GR users right now are screaming at me through the phone and computer, Chris. That's the whole point. We don't want one. You're supposed to use these things hands outstretched or one-handed, even better, like a cowboy, and look really badass while you're shooting. And I get it. It's part of the fun, but you have to admit it's also a very limiting factor. Some people really need EVFs to shoot, or me, I just really want one. I mean, I get that it's an engineering difficulty, small body, it's going to make the camera more expensive, but why not give us an electric connection through the hot shoe to give us a hot shoe mounted EVF? A lot of other camera manufacturers do that. That'd be a nice touch. Now, Ricoh does offer an optical viewfinder called the GV3. It works well with the snap focus and for composing, but I'd still prefer an EVF. Now, one thing Ricoh could have done to alleviate some of these issues is to give us an improved panel on the back of the camera, but that's not the case either. It's the same older panel, 3-inch, just over 1 million dots, not particularly bright, and in sunlight it's hard to see with. I can't see this LCD screen. Then unfortunately, although you can raise the brightness of the panel, it really hurts your battery life, which is already a major weakness on the GR cameras. So that's unfortunate. There's also no way that I could tilt it out to do selfies or waist level stuff. That could have enhanced the versatility. And so I know I'm complaining about these things. I mean, it's not any worse than the GR III. I just feel like this is another area where there was room for improvement and none was done. Okay, last complaint, I swear, but the other thing that's carried over from the GR3, unfortunately, is the pretty poor battery life. 200 shots is the CEPA rating, same as the GR3, and this is a real problem. I mean, I'm living in fear of when the battery's gonna cut out. Unfortunately, the battery indicator isn't very indicative of how many shots you have left. It kind of says full, then 3 bars, and then like, oh, you're screwed. So you definitely want to carry extra batteries. I'd want, though, at least 3, and then that's convenient from a charging standpoint, from having to carry them all, make sure you don't lose them. Luckily, you do still have the USB charging capability in here, but it is by far one of the big weaknesses on this camera. So what is there to love? Well, a lot. I mean, it really comes down to the shooting experience of this camera and the images that you get out of it. And I want to start with this. In the last review, I neglected to play with a lot of the color modes, and I really, in fact, missed out on the black and white modes, which are actually quite stunningly beautiful. So I made sure to play with those here. I love the standard black and white profile, very nice. The soft black and white, the hard black and white, give you contrast options, very usable. The high contrast black and white mode is a little bit too wacky. And the only issue that I really have is that sometimes the LCD doesn't really display exactly the final result. Sometimes it shows different looks or, you know, strange curves and halos, which actually luckily don't show up in the final photograph. So that's nice. But every time I do look in the playback, I'm pleasantly surprised. So we have the same 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, but it's par for the course. Perfectly fine quality, a nice high ISO performance, dynamic range. We've seen this many times before, and it's good. Now, Jordan would like me to talk about the video capabilities here. It's the same 1080p video you find on the GR3. It's pretty bad video, but now it's bad video on a 40mm lens, so that's nice. I'd probably just stick to the smartphone instead for video. Ricoh's carried over their excellent 3-axis shake reduction IBIS system from the Ricoh GR3. Very stable here. I like the fact that we've got a leaf shutter, so there's no vibration when shooting, and even with the 40mm lens, I'm getting a nice stable platform, which of course is very important, seeing as how you're always holding the camera out here with your hands. Okay, so Jordan says this frame is very flattering for me. He says I look taller than normal, so that's a great thing. Let's talk about the lens. Now, that's the big change here on the Ricoh GR IIIx. We've now got a 26.1mm f2.8 lens. Gives us a full frame equivalent of 40mm roughly. And I do like this focal length. It's not 35. Gives me a little bit more compression, a little bit nicer for portraiture. Still wide enough that I can crop in for tighter perspectives or get more of the story by taking a few steps backwards. And a nice alternative to a 28mm on the GR3, which I do love. Another feature carried over, there is a built-in ND filter. It's a 2-stop ND. Makes it a little bit easier if you want to shoot wide open in really bright sun. So we tested this lens on our test chart, and here's what we found. So here first, looking at the center at f2.8, you can see it's very sharp already. When we stop down to 5.6, you don't really see that much difference. Now in the corners at f2.8, you can see here it's a little bit soft, and stopping down to 5.6, that does improve quite nicely. But overall, I'd be happy using this lens at any aperture. It's very good. Ricoh absolutely got bokeh right on this 40mm equivalent lens. First off, I like that we have a more telephoto range, so we can make a little bit more use of shallow depth of field and bokeh, but very smooth transitions from in focus to out of focus areas, and even shooting wide open, we're not really seeing any cat's eye in the corners. Bokeh stays round even when you stop down. Now, of course, we want to test this lens for LoCA, which is longitudinal chromatic aberration, where you get those color fringes in the foreground and background out of focus. As you can see here, slight magenta in the foreground, slight green in the background, but it's very minor, nothing to worry about. That's good news. Now, Ricoh says you can also stop down this lens and get some nice sun stars. I don't know if I'd call them nice. They're not great, unfortunately, but it does have that. Now, there's no way that you can really put a hood on the front of this lens, so flare was an issue as well, as you can see here. Be careful with that. So autofocus on the GR IIIx is the same as the Ricoh GR3, of course, and so tracking autofocus still isn't very effective for fast-moving subjects. It's not very sticky. It was kind of behind the times when we looked at it on the GR3, and obviously it hasn't improved. But I still like using tracking AF if I'm doing, you know, still lifes where I'm going to focus on an area and then recompose. I can even change my distance a little bit, and it'll account for that change. But otherwise, though, I'm just really liking the speed of the single-point autofocus and relying on it quite a bit. And I'm finding that's actually giving me a really good success rate. So in the end, I mean, what do you want me to say? It's a Ricoh GR III with a 40mm lens. All the stuff that made that camera great, all the stuff that holds that camera back are present here. But I do like the focal length change. And I mean, you gotta remember that this is still a beautifully handling camera that's very sexy and very compact, and it's quite unique. I mean, what it does very well. And so if this is the kind of way you wanna shoot, you don't need an EVF. For the price, it's actually a pretty decent package. Now, alternatives, well, if you don't mind the larger size, which is now pushing the limits of pocketability and more cost, the Fujifilm X100V basically does everything this camera does and more. It addresses a lot of the complaints that I do have for this, and I love that camera. But I will end it on this note. This camera, there's just something about it which makes it easy to covet and love, and that's an underappreciated factor in cameras nowadays. So that's our Ricoh GR IIIx review. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Go to dpreview.com, links in the description below for our sample gallery shot on this camera. Check out those photos. Please subscribe to the channel. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Can't wait to see you soon.